Welcome back. I'm Megan Swezey Fogarty, along with State Senator Joe Simitian. Joining us today is State Senator Alan Lowenthal, who represents the 27th Senate District near Long Beach. So thank you both for being here. Our topic today is high-speed rail.
Right.
And I know the two of you were asking questions a long time ago, but tell us where we stand today.
Well, it's just really a continuation. We started to ask these questions when I was the chair of Senate Transportation in 2007, to ask them to have a business plan that we could do so that we could make decisions, to put something on the ballot, and to ask them to provide us with real ridership numbers. And then we've held hearings in Palo Alto, and we've continued to kind of watch them and to ask the important questions, especially on Joe and I sit on the budget subcommittee that oversees their budget, and so we've really tried to ask them to answer those questions.
This is actually, it's sort of a technical thing, but for folks at home, it has worked out very well, because for a number of years, Alan was the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, on which I sat as a member. I was the chair of the Budget Subcommittee with responsibility for transportation funding, on which he sits as a member. So we were able to sort of work in sync in both of those venues, and in a way that, you know, very collaborative, very cooperative, and meant that we sort of had each other's backs as the conversation progressed.
So
and now I chair the Select Committee on High-Speed Rail, and Joe sits as a member.
Okay, and that you held hearings, I know.
Exactly.
So where are things for those who haven't been watching it closely?
Well, you know, one of the things that the legislature, which we did, Joe and I worked on, was when we did the enabling legislation to put it on the ballot, we said that there needs to be a peer review committee that independently to review the business plan before we appropriate any monies, and to report back to the legislature. And that's where we said we have just recently received the peer review committee's report.
Well, and they have raised, on the one hand, they raised a number of issues that had frankly already been raised by somebody else in some other forum. But I thought they did a very good job of cramming into 7-8 pages, you know, sort of all of the very compelling concerns that have been raised about where we are at the moment and should we take the next steps. And the next steps are, do we really want to spend $6 billion on the initial construction segment of this project for about 130 miles in the Central Valley? And it's, you know, up till now we've been spending significant amounts of money and time, but to develop the plan essentially, or the High-Speed Rail Authority has. Now we're faced with the very hard decision that has $2.5 billion of state funding and $3.5 billion worth of federal funding on the table, and are we ready to go? I have described this as a watershed moment. I think we really are at it's decision time.
And what were some of the key criticisms?
Well, one of the criticisms were that their business plan really entails a critical component is a business model. Who's going to pay what? What role is the federal government going to play? What role is the state government going to play? And what role is the private sector? In their model up until now, they've said, well, the federal government's going to pay a great deal of money in this. Well, we've only have $3 billion, and they are very concerned that we will have a stranded project, is what their terminology. And they said, slow down before you appropriate any of the state money until we find out really, you know, what the business model is going to be. What role will the federal government play? And what we've been asking is, what role will the state have in requesting flexibility from the federal government to be able to move the money after we do a planning process in ways in which we will both move forward high-speed rail, but at the same time we will do it in a judicious and a way in which we will not waste our state money.
I think the peer review group, I think, commended the High-Speed Rail Authority for breaking the project, which is now estimated to be a $100 billion project in total, breaking it down into manageable segments. And the first segment is this 130 miles in the Central Valley. What the peer review group raises, though, by way of concern, which is the same issues that Alan and I were raising last year, is, so what if we have $6 billion that we're going to spend, all of the federal money that's been allocated plus a pretty good chunk of the state money that's been authorized by the voters, if nothing ever happens after that, what do we have to show for that $6 billion? And the answer is not high-speed rail, but a somewhat faster segment of conventional rail in the Central Valley in an area that does not have the highest ridership. And so the question is that really where we want to put, you know, all of our resources? Is that the best way to spend $6 billion if you're going to proceed?
You see, what the model that they were going by was that in the Federal Highway Act, when we created the interstate highway system, we started in the middle and expanded out. And they said, well, we could do the same thing with high-speed rail. The difference is that the Federal Highway, we had a dedicated revenue stream to pay for the entire thing, and that was the federal excise tax on gasoline. We do not have a dedicated revenue stream, and so what they are suggesting is that the legislature step back, take a look, and say, why not deal with the extremities? There are 28 million passengers yearly in a blended approach between if you take the areas between San Jose and San Francisco and LA, Anaheim, out to the San Fernando Valley. Both those segments have 28 million passengers. The orange, the part in the Central Valley has less than 1 million passengers. Where do we start? They're saying legislatures and begin to raise these questions.
Because right now we're faced with what I think are two bad choices. I mean, essentially, the choice is either $6 billion on a segment in the Central Valley that does not appear to have an awful lot of value added after the funds are spent, or a full-scale stop to the project. And, you know, there are folks who support both those positions. There are folks who say, let's go, sort of consequences be damned. Then you got other folks who say, you know, it's time to just call it off. Just say, you know, might have been a good idea, maybe not, but it's not happening. And, you know, I find myself more in agreement with what, I don't think the peer review group actually suggested a timeout, but that's kind of where I am, which is, you know, maybe what we need to say is, look, before we spend $6 billion, let's just take a year and revisit some of these decisions. And if you can make a more compelling case, make it, but look seriously. And I don't mean, you know, nodding and smiling as you work your way through the process to get to the same result. I mean, look seriously at some of these other options, including the one that Alan describes, which is, you know, if you spent the money at the two ends of the system with 28 million passengers, if that was all that was ever done, at least you'd have first-rate rail for 30 million riders a year.
Yeah, I think the 800-pound gorilla sitting on is that will we have flexibility with the federal monies? And that's the question that the legislature has to ask. That's the question that California has to ask the federal government. We have a commitment to matching those. That's why we're spending half federal funds, half state funds. But we would like to have greater flexibility. Those are questions that still remain unanswered.
And I think we have more flexibility. I think right now we've got folks who want to hurry up, who are not looking for flexibility. They're looking for the agreement we have with the federal government to sort of serve as the impetus to move forward, notwithstanding the concerns. I think we need to say, what flexibility do we have? What flexibility could we obtain? The hearing that Alan and I were at in December on this issue, when pressed, the folks said, well, we do have to commit the funds by 2017, but the statutory commitment to commit the funds by 2017 doesn't actually apply to the 2012 date. That may be in a different document. And then we heard later on, when we asked for the document, which we hadn't been able to get a hold of, which was a source of some frustration. Well, maybe the 2012 date has a little more flexibility. Well, that's a big if. So, you know, one of the things I learned as a young man was, whenever anybody tells you it's a one-time only good deal, act now or you'll lose this opportunity, you have to buy the car, it's going to be off the lot tomorrow, that should make you nervous. And I think that's where a lot of people
That's exactly where we are.
So let's back up a little bit. If the entire project was scrapped, outside of the money that's already been invested, what else does California lose?
Well, I don't think, you know, I don't think we're at this point that either one of us are talking about scrapping the entire. What we're talking about is, if California has made a commitment to moving forward with a high-speed rail, let's make sure that we do it right. We are only going to have one opportunity to do it. Let's take the time to make sure that in our planning and in our securing of funds, that what we're doing, that the first segment that we build are ones in which we will be able to make sure that we're successful in it, successful in ridership, and demonstrate that it works in California.
And
that's all we're saying.
And as I talk, and you know, Alan mentioned passing. I mean, he was kind enough to come down to my district in January of, gosh, was it 2010, I guess. So it's been
2010 or 29.
Yeah, time is flying by here. But you know, we had 500 folks, and as I talk to my constituents, and there's a range of views, but I think the frustration that people feel, which I think we both share, is, look, conceptually, we wanted to see this happen. And yet, we authorized what we thought were sufficient funds to make a go of this based on what we were asked to do by the state. And now all we are is 3 years into it with a lot of squabbles and, you know, not a lot of assurance that we can move forward. And I think people want us to sort it out. And as I said, while they're at the sort of polar ends of the argument, there are the folks who say just call it a day right now, or folks who say move forward, you know, notwithstanding these concerns. I think there is a middle ground, and I think we ought to try and find it.
Right now, where we are and where we're going forward is we will plan, Joe's committee, my committee, and Senate Transportation will be holding hearings on the latest report.
Okay.
Then later on this year, the governor will be requesting an appropriation for the highs. We will have to discuss whether, in fact, how we deal with that appropriation.
But that's a $6 billion question, including the federal funds, and we have to come to a conclusion about that by June 30th.
That's right.
For our budget, and so for folks who are watching, you know, it's the crunch time is these next 6 months.
This is the most critical decision in California. This is the time that we really have to examine, you know, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and what's the most appropriate steps to be taken in the next year or two.
Okay, well, great. Well, we'll continue to follow. Thank you both for your leadership.
Thank you.
Capitol Focus will return in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Capitol Focus. Along with State Senator Joe Simitian, I'm Megan Swezey Fogarty. So great to have Senator Lowenthal again on the show.
I just, you know, Alan and I have been colleagues since the first day I arrived. He arrived 2 years before I did here in the legislature, and he has really played a marvelous role on high-speed rail. He's been an honest broker, whether he agreed or disagreed. He made sure that you got heard, and I think his role in making sure that this is a thoughtful and informed debate is an important one. And as he referenced, I mean, Megan, this is an issue that I will be spending a great deal of time this year on as a matter of necessity, and given the fact that, you know, we've got $6 billion that is on the table right now, and $100 billion long term. If it means I do less work in the legislative arena, then so be it. Similarly, you know,